All right, we've got a special one for you tonight. We've got Tom Campbell with us of My Big Toe, and that toe being the theory of everything. Tom worked with Bob Monroe way back in the early 70s at the Monroe Institute. Most of you guys have probably heard of Tom and definitely heard of the Monroe Institute. We've had a few guests from there on already. And we talk about, extended consciousness all the time. And Tom's been studying this for like 30 years, focusing on the scientifically exploring the properties, boundaries, and abilities of consciousness. And in the meantime, he's also been a scientist as well. He's a physicist. He's got a website, mybigtoe.com, and there's an active forum on there. There's lots of information, tons of YouTube channels. It's really interesting. Tom's been practicing, different states of consciousness for decades and studying it scientifically. So we're really excited to have you on here, Tom. It's thanks for coming on.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah, it was
good.
Go ahead.
Good to be here, Darren.
Yeah, it's good to finally have you on. Like I mentioned, we've had I've listened to so many of those Hemisync Monroe Institute CDs, and we've had people on. We've talked about out of body experience quite a bit, and so it's good to dig into it a little bit further. And the thing I didn't really mention is, I think a lot of this ends up coming back to one of our favorite topics, which is like the simulation theory or sort of the virtual reality aspect of our reality. But I was thinking of changing up the style a little bit here tonight, and if you don't mind, instead of going like all the way through your background, which is, we could spend probably a half hour just going through that, I was thinking we could probably naturally go back there through the show if we start with what's kind of new and what's going on with some of that stuff. Because a lot of our listeners would have heard of you. They would have heard of your work in the Monroe Institute. And maybe we can end up naturally sort of filling in your backstory a little bit as we go along, but maybe start with sort of some of the latest stuff.
Yep, that's fine. Well, if we want to start in the present, then I guess the thing that's the hottest topic right now for me and my work is that I just had a fundraiser, with Kickstart,
yep,
and raised about $230K in order to do a set of physics experiments, mostly quantum mechanics experiments, that will help validate the model that I have.
Nice.
Or not. That's the way experiments work. So anyway, what happened is that as I developed over the 35 years or so, you mentioned I developed a theory of consciousness. And then maybe 2 or 3, 4 years after I'd published this theory of consciousness, and of course, I call it a theory of everything because I knew consciousness was fundamental.
Yep.
Everything else is a subset of consciousness. So it was a theory of everything being a theory of consciousness. But I didn't really know the details of how this theory of consciousness should, say, derive quantum mechanics or relativity or, the rest of physics. But I knew that there must be a connection there. But a couple of years after I got it published, I got the aha moment when I realized, exactly what the connection was. And I realized I understood quantum mechanics now from the perspective of a virtual reality. And my model is based on this reality that we call our physical universe being a virtual reality. So once I understood that, I started looking for other things that are big unknowns in physics. And of course, the next big unknown, other than why quantum mechanics works the way it does, is why is the speed of light a constant? That's the fundamental assumption underneath all of relativity theory. Relativity is just built on that fact. If you take that away, then relativity theory disappears. So no one really understands in physics why speed of light ought to be a constant. Why can't you have a flashlight going very fast and then have it send out a light, and wouldn't the speed of that light be the sum of the two?
Yeah.
No, it just doesn't matter which direction that flashlight's going. Just doesn't matter. It always comes out C. Well, it didn't take me but a few days to figure out from a virtual reality viewpoint why C absolutely has to be a constant. So then I started looking at the other we call them paradoxes in physics, and also in neuroscience, and some in metaphysics as well. And sure enough, with that understanding, I could solve all these problems. So then I started looking at quantum mechanics a little more thoroughly, started looking at some experiments that, according to my theory, things should work a certain way, and there weren't any experiments to see whether it would or not. So I'm kind of stuck there until I get an experiment done. But if you don't have a few $100K in your pocket, getting a big name physics department to go do experiments for you is a real hard thing to do. So we just did the Kickstart. We got some money, and now we are going to get these experiments done. Probably within a year, we should have them done. Right now, we're in the phase of searching for somebody competent to do the work, somebody both competent and willing to do the work. So that's kind of the big thing now. There's a set of 5 experiments, and within those 5, there's some subset of other experiments. But what they will do is provide evidence for this being a virtual reality. That is a reality that's information based, okay, or a simulation. You could call it a simulated reality. And they will also provide evidence for consciousness being the computer. So a virtual reality needs a source, needs a computer. So now we don't use the word prove in science much anymore. We kind of let that go after Newton ended up with egg all over his face from Newton's laws, which turned out not to be laws at all, but just approximations within certain realms of interaction. So science now talks about evidence, and these experiments should lend some strong evidence to the idea that we're living in a virtual reality and that consciousness is the computer. Now, that's a very different viewpoint of virtual reality than what you're going to get from the Elon Musk crowd, which is really based on, the Englishman, Nick Bostrom.
Yeah.
Nick Bostrom, about a decade and a half ago, around 2000, Nick Bostrom wrote a paper talking about logically, it seemed like a very positive probability that we were living in a virtual reality, but it was all logic based. And once he said that, a lot of people tended to agree with him because it was logical. But this idea of, well, if that's the case, then how is it that this could be a virtual reality? Where's the computer? What could be computing it? And because everybody pretty much is a materialist at heart, even if they don't think so, because we just, you breathe the air and you live in this space, in this culture.
Yeah, you feel the table, which is hard, but it's really just, empty space and
we just can't we can't help but absorb that idea that this is a materialistic place. So their idea was that there must be some future humans that are engaging in some nostalgia, creating this virtual reality. But that fails logically on a couple of points. So I'm just telling your listeners, don't confuse that kind of virtual reality with what I'm talking about, which is really a top-down approach to deriving everything. Not only science and quantum mechanics and relativity, but also metaphysics, also philosophy, also theology. It seems that it all comes out of this idea of consciousness. So that's kind of where I am. It's an exciting time for me because these experiments will do one of two things. They'll either show that the ideas I have now are correct, or they'll show they're not correct, and I need to work on some other ideas that that are better. But that's how science works. You get to a point where you don't know, well, is this idea I have right or not? Well, it's hard to tell unless you do an experiment. And if you can if you can put it into physical terms, where an experiment will tell you whether it's right or not, then you can move on. So that's where I am, kind of in that stuck place as far as deriving quantum mechanics, and I need these experiments to unstick me. Whether they tell me I'm right or wrong isn't so much the issue as I'll get going again. If it's right, then I'll expand. If it's wrong, I'll look for a different viewpoint.
Can you get into those experiences a little bit deeper?
Sure. Experiments. They are mostly of the double slit variety, which is a real good experiment for this sort of thing to use. The double slit experiment was really the birthplace of quantum mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
It was that experiment that showed everybody that reality really was not material. It was not, it could not be computed with material properties, that electrons and photons and all the other tons, all the particles really weren't particles at all. Rather, they're probability distributions. And that was what quantum mechanics, told us. If you want to calculate the right answer, then you start with the assumption that particles aren't particles, that they are probability distributions. And that then will allow you to calculate answers that actually are verifiable with experiment. So that's been the big mystery. And scientists had two ways to go there. They could have said, well, that's really interesting. Therefore, we must not really understand reality very well, because unless we look at particles as probability distributions, we can't get right answers. Or they could have gone another way, which says, oh, materialism is great and we understand reality just well. This is just weird science. And nobody can understand this, and nobody ever will understand this weird science. That's just life. Get used to it. Quantum mechanics is weird and it'll always be that way. So unfortunately, the original scientists that developed quantum mechanics, they were in the first group. They were very excited. They had found something fundamentally new in reality. And about 20 or 30 years later, when nobody could come up with any good ideas for an alternative, the tide started to turn the other way. Quantum mechanics just became known as weird science, and scientists went on rather than looking for a new perspective in which quantum mechanics made good logical sense. So these experiments are double slit experiments, variations. Richard Feynman, I won't quote, because to quote you have to be exact, but it's very close to what he said, and that is the double slit experiments holds the secrets of quantum mechanics. Everything that we don't really understand about quantum mechanics and makes it weird science, it's right there in the double slit experiment. If we could understand that, we'd understand it all. So that's what makes the double slit a really good thing. Now, what I've done with these, if my predictions, and these are just, I'm taking the theory I have at the present time and then saying how these experiments should come out and why. And 2 or 3 of them are rather remarkable. One of them allows the experimenter to determine how a radioactive source is going to decay. Now, that should be impossible, you see. Now, what it does is that it lets the experimenter, well, let me back up. Let's say we have a radioactive source, and we put a Geiger counter around one hemisphere of it, around half of it, and we put a Geiger counter around the other half of it, which means that wherever this particle shoots off, which should be random, when the particles decay, when a big atom decays to something smaller, energy's let go, a radioactive particle flies off, and it flies off in some random direction. That's the way the world works. So it'll either hit the one hemisphere or it'll hit the other. That's the way you make a yes, no, or a binary random number generator, you see. That's how you get random numbers in a like a 1-0. You use radioactive particles to do that. So we'll have one of those things, and the experimenter will be able to say, next particle that comes off will be, in the left hemisphere, and the next one will be in the left again, and the next one will be in the right, and so on. It'll be able to predict how that decays, which is patently impossible, unless, of course, it's a calculated virtual reality, and there is an intelligent source. The other one we do that is.
Is he gonna? What if he affects that by predicting it?
Well, this experiment, he'll be able to predict it. So that's the point. He'll do the experiment. That experiment will allow him to make these predictions and then see whether or not his predictions are correct. If they are, it tells us that something very strange about reality, because that shouldn't be allowed. It shouldn't be able to be done. So that's the point. You set up an experiment where the experiment does something that is impossible, which is what the original double slit did. It did something that was impossible.
Yeah.
It let people throw particles at 2 slits, and for no reason that anybody understands, these particles distribute themselves in a diffraction pattern on a screen. There's no forces on them, nothing to make them move or rearrange themselves, but they just do that anyway, and that's what makes it a weird science. But they only do that when nobody collects the which way data, which is which slit did it go through of the two slits. So that was something that was impossible, and it did it. And when you do things with an experiment that are impossible, what that tells you is that you don't really understand, the nature of your reality. Obviously, it is possible because it just happened. You just don't understand. You don't have the right perspective to see why it's not only possible, but it's necessary. It has to be that way. So that's one of my experiments that it's kind of does something impossible. Another one allows the experimenter to accurately predict whether or not a photon will transmit or reflect at a beam splitter. Now, there should be a 50-50 chance, and it should be impossible because that's just the nature of this device. It's the way it's constructed. That's what it does. Half the time it reflects, the other half the time it transmits. And to be able to predict which is which, again, is a miracle. It's one of those things that should be impossible. So again, doing the impossible means that you're pointing out something that we don't understand about the nature of reality. And these two things, not only will they lend a lot of evidence to a virtual reality because they can both be explained very easily with a virtual reality, but they also will lend some evidence to consciousness as the computer, because they can be done with consciousness in the loop, changing the experiment as you go, and you'll see that the pattern will change relative to the way the experimenter changes. So it connects it to consciousness. Now, that's just if these experiments work this way. They may not. If not, then I'm back at the drawing boards. It's a little difficult to come up with a physical experiment that verifies something that's fundamentally non-physical. You see, consciousness is a non-physical thing, and that's just part of that just falls out of this reality being virtual. Yeah. And now I can just give you I give your listeners just a little logic there. If you have a virtual reality, and let's take The Sims for virtual reality. Okay, if you're in The Sims, if you're a character in The Sims, then the computer that computes The Sims has to be non-physical from the perspective of inside The Sims. To the Sims characters, the computer that computes The Sims has to be non-physical. In other words, the computer can't be inside the virtual reality it's computing. All right, that seems pretty obvious. It's the same thing with the consciousness. The consciousness in the Sims game is the player. The player makes all the choices for the Sims character. The Sims character is called an avatar. Okay, the consciousness cannot be inside the virtual reality.
So does that mean I'm an avatar?
Well, who do you mean by I'm? I'm a physical body. Yes. Yeah.
Darren Grimes, podcaster.
Exactly. That means your physical body is an avatar, and that the choices that are being made that just told you to raise your hand and point at yourself and say the word Darren, those choices are made by your consciousness. And consciousness, by definition of virtual reality, has to be non-physical from the perspective of inside the virtual reality.
So do you think I'm outside of this thing, like controlling it from the outside somehow, or do you think this could be something more pre-programmed on the shelf and I'm just some sort of projection of technology?
Well, I think that you are an individuated unit of consciousness that has been, what can we say, immersively connected or logged on to your body as a avatar to play, and this immersiveness is such that it thinks it is your body, because the only information that it can remember in its whole existence is responding to your sense data. Okay, so just like if you are playing again a Sims character, what you respond to is the Sims character's sense data, what the Sims character sees, what the Sims character hears, what the Sims character, runs into or touches or feels. And the consciousness then is basically in a communication with the computer. So you as consciousness playing Sims interact with a computer. The actual Sims game itself, the virtual reality of the Sims, only exists in the minds of the players. You see, it doesn't actually exist in some world. It only exists in the minds of the players. So yes, that's a big step to take. That is that you are your consciousness, your body's an avatar, and your consciousness is making all the choices. Your conscious what animates you.
I'm the imagination of myself.
Yeah, see, but that's where free will. That's because when I've heard you talk about this before, I was thinking of if this is an analogy to like The Sims, and that we are I have my avatar here, but my consciousness is somewhere else, connected to everybody else's consciousness, or connected to something bigger. Then, do I really have free will, or is my consciousness? Is it beyond my unique?
Your avatar doesn't have free will, but the person who's controlling it does.
I don't know.
Yes, of course. An avatar doesn't have free will. Does your elf in World of Warcraft have free will? No. When you stop playing, if you don't touch the keyboard and don't touch the mouse, what does your elf do? Just stands there and wobbles, doesn't do anything. Can't do anything. He doesn't have any free will to say, well, I think I'm going to go over and sit down till my player comes back from lunch. It doesn't do that. It just stands there and wobbles. It does nothing.
Brody thinks that his elf is still playing in the computer without him.
But like they do stuff. Like they'll dance and they'll sit down.
They'll dance. Okay, so that's all
pre-programmed.
So, yeah.
I can get on board with that.
You do have free will. Free will is necessary. Consciousness and free will go together. You can't have consciousness, the choice maker, without free will, which is the ability to make the choice. So consciousness and free will are a logical set. And in that set, you also have time. Consciousness, free will, and time are all logically necessary for each other. Okay? You can't have a choice without time, because there was before the choice and after the choice. That defines time. Change defines time. So if there is choice, then there has to be consciousness and there has to be time. So all of those go together, and the opposite end of that, the things that are antithetical to that, are materialism, determinism, okay? And if you have materialism, you have to have determinism. Those two are a logical set. And if you have those two, you have to also state that there is no time and there is no consciousness, that both time and consciousness are illusions. So those are the two opposite logical poles. You either have consciousness, free will, and time, or you have materialism, determinism, and time and free will are both, and consciousness are all illusions.
And if you go with that, the evidence that you've seen and that we've talked about on the show lots, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, past lives. I mean, that shows us that it can't be materialism and determinism.
Exactly. And just our everyday experience. I mean, we feel that we make choices, and we feel that we make the choices that we intend to make. And we know we could make other choices, but we make choice A instead of choice B. Our own experience tells us that there is time. It's a flow. It's in one direction. It tells us that there are choices and that we get to make them. This idea that all of these things are illusions, it's not that is philosophically impossible. It's just that it's a dead end. It's unlikely because it doesn't go anywhere. You see, if there is no free will and you have determinism and everything's materialistic, all right, what's next? Nothing.
Video games.
What?
Video games.
Video games. No, you can't have video games there. Video games require time. Time has to go sequence through the video game.
But time is different when you're not in your body, though, isn't it? I mean, I've never had an out-of-body experience, but how do you explain the difference in time when you're in another reality? Like when you're energy packet or however, then that's the other kind of question I had was, if it is if we are in a simulation or a virtual reality and I leave my body, how does the simulation deal with that? Like, how does it separates my consciousness as an energy packet or something, and then I have, maybe if my physical avatar dies, I can actually go somewhere else and come back into another body, a couple years later. So there's a couple comments and questions wrapped in there, but
okay, let me answer them first with an example. Let's say you're playing The Sims, and while you play The Sims, you also boot up your World of Warcraft. Now, can you leave? Can you walk away from the computer one doing The Sims and walk over and get your elf to go fight a barbarian or something? Well, sure you can, right? That's not a problem. You can do that, and if you're good, if you can parallel process, you can play both of them at the same time. You can be working your Sims and working your elf both with a mouse in either hand. You won't be particularly great at either one because you're going to be distracted by the other, but you'll be able to work. But you will be able to work them both. So that's the way it works. It's not much different than that. You don't leave, your consciousness isn't in your body. This idea of getting out of your body is a metaphor that just doesn't work in logical space. You're already out of your body. Your consciousness, you're not in your body. Your body is a avatar. You don't get into your elf.
That's interesting. Okay, so I've never really thought about it that way. Yeah. It's already separated.
Yeah, it's already
that's
separated.
Cool. Because sorry, go ahead.
Your consciousness doesn't get into your elf or into your Sims character. You are consciousness playing that character. You're already out of body. All you need to do is attach yourself to a different data stream. When you're playing World of Warcraft, you have a data stream coming from the World of Warcraft server, and that data shows up on your monitor as a million pieces of light, right? And that light has intensity, color, and position. That's it. It's a pixel. And that's the data you get from the computer. You look at that data, all those little dots of light, and you interpret that into elves and monsters and rivers and streams and rocks and trees. And you interpret all those little spots of light as that. Okay? So the game, the World of Warcraft, is only existing in your mind from your interpretation of the data. Now, an out of body is just like letting that go and going over and turning on the Sims then, or logging on over there. So now you have a different server with a different data stream. Okay? Or you could have the same server. It doesn't matter about the computer. It could be the same computer serving both games, let's say, but it's just a different part of that server that's now serving up Sims. So that's the way it is when you go out of body. All you need to do, you are consciousness. You already are not in your avatar. You're outside. You just have to attach to a different data stream. And if you want to and you practice, you can attach to both. And you can be here and there, but you're not as effective in either one because each distracts you from the other. So all the same things are available to you as a consciousness as are available to you in a game. Virtual reality has certain logic, and that logic is the same no matter how you scale it.
Oh, that's how you can maybe heal when you're in an astral realm, or see something physical that's actually really there in that time that your body's, sitting there with your consciousness left. So that's the different data stream. Is you're still sort of, you can even partially affect that server.
That's exactly right. You're just interacting with a server. So that's what reality is. You get a data stream and you interpret it to be something. So it's the going out of body, is made very difficult by just a couple of reasons. One is fear, and two is belief. You have a belief that you have to somehow get out of your body. So people try to roll out like Bob Monroe, or they climb up a non-physical rope, or they lift their arm up to see if they, have a non-physical arm. And they've got all these little tricks that are just trying to get them to let go of that physical reality data stream. But you can do that easily. That's not such a hard thing to do. When you read a good book that really captures your interest, you've let go of the physical data stream.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about the traffic outside or, the dog barking in the neighbor's yard. It's not that you can't hear any of it. You've just detached from it all.
Yeah.
It's just not there for you anymore. Well, that would put you out of body, away from this data stream, except now you've connected yourself to the data stream of the book. So you're still stuck there in that data stream. If you could let go of that too, then you'd basically be out of your body. Not really out of your body. You just have your awareness attached to some other data stream. So as you learn to do these things, you find it's easier and easier. And where originally you had to lie down and then you did relaxation exercises and then you did a bunch of other stuff, and in a half an hour later you're out of body, you can do that in maybe a tenth of a second. It's just a matter of shifting your focus from one data stream to another. All the rest of that ritual is completely unnecessary, other than we have these beliefs that it has to take place, that somehow we have to get out of inside of us to someplace else, and all that process needs to happen. And that's what hangs us up and makes it very difficult. There is no process that needs to happen. It's all your intent to latch onto one data stream or another.
So speaking of intent, is that why do we have any control over our circumstance or our outcome in this thing? Or is that why people seem to say that intentions and affirmations and placebo and all that, is all that sort of us tweaking this reality, or is that all tied outside of it as well?
No, that's us tweaking the reality. We have three ways that we, can change, can modify, I guess a good word, our reality. Now, it doesn't mean we control our reality, but there are ways that we can modify it sometimes. And I can tell you when one of the sometimes you can and one of the sometimes that you're not likely to. One of those ways is by how we interpret the data. Remember, you get a data stream and you look at all those pixels and you say, aha, World of Warcraft, look, there's my elf. And, he's swimming in a stream. I need to keep his head up or he'll drown. You interpret the pixels to be something and you interact with it accordingly. Well, how you interpret that data creates that reality. So the reality you're in right now is created in large extent by just how you interpret the data. You see, you can't share an experience. You have an experience, but you can't share it directly. All you can share is a description of your experience. So you can take your experience, you can describe it to somebody. Oh, I felt like this and I felt like that. And they can listen to your description and they'll interpret that description in terms of their own experience. And what they get out of that, their reality view, is their interpretation of your experience. You see? Yep. So experience is individual. It's personal. And our reality is our interpretation of the data we get. That's what we see. That's why, women are from Venus and men are from Mars, because they interpret things differently. They hear the same data, but they come to different conclusions about what it means. But
that's the interpretation. Yes. That's the incoming stream.
Right.
What about like what Darren was talking about with the intention and let's say like affirmation, all that would be your outgoing, right? So then explain how that relates. No,
I'm gonna do both of those, but that's one. And what that does is actually changes your reality. Your reality. There is no reality other than what's in your mind.
Your perception.
You create the reality in your mind. That's it. So when you interpret that data a particular way, to you, that is your reality. It's not like there's some other reality out there that's truth and you just didn't interpret it right. Your interpretation is your reality. So that's one way. And another way is through our behavior, because if we change our behavior, we change the way people interact with us. And of course, then that changes our reality. But the way that's the kind of the niftiest way, the one you're getting at, is that our intent can modify future probability. Okay, so if there is no, the future isn't a done deal. The future is just probabilistic. And any one time there may be, in a particular instance, there may be 5 different things that are likely to happen there, that are possible that could happen there. some of them are more likely than others. Which one's actually going to happen when we get to the present? So I'm talking about a database of all the things that could happen and the probability that they would. So we have this thing I call the probable future database. Just probability. Those probabilities change. One of the ways they change is through our intent. So we can have an intent for that probability to change from, let's say now it could be A, B, or C, are the things that might happen because of a choice we made. We can make C more probable, perhaps, if the probabilities are all not too different from each other. But now let's say that they're A, B, and C, and let's say the probability that A will happen is 0.999999999 and so on, and the probability that either B or C will happen is 1 in a million. Well, we may put our intent on that because we want B or C to happen, and we may bring that 1 in a million possibility that we want all the way to just 1 in 1,000. Well, geez, that's 3 orders of magnitude. That's a huge change, but it's still not likely to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, that's why I say you have influence. It doesn't mean you always get what you want, because it depends on how much probability you have to move, and it depends on how strong you are, how capable you are at moving probability.
And the action that you take probably as well. I mean, there's that whole thing about, you can't just sit back and wish for that. You have to then sort of let that go and then act on it.
Yeah, every action you make would be multiplying your probability.
Yeah.
I could really get on board.
Yeah. So it's a feedback loop, you see. And with this feedback loop, what it does is we end up creating a reality here that is a good representation of who we are. So if you look around at this reality and you watch the news and you think, well, this place really sucks. There's so much dysfunction going on. There's so much greed and so much, nastiness. That actually represents us. That's who we are. If you look at humanity, then that's the average quality of our consciousness. So what you see is pretty much what we get, because we manifest things with our intent. We modify them with our intent. No, everybody doesn't get what they want. You're not a master of your reality in that way. You have free will only to make the choices that you realize that the choices are there. That's all free will is. So free will, if there's 20 things that you might do when you come to this crossroads and you're only aware of 10 of them, well, your free will is to make the choice among those 10. That's it. You see, free will doesn't mean you get anything you want. It just means you get to choose from the choices that you know about. So free will grows and gets smaller and gets bigger as your reality gets smaller and gets bigger. As you grow up, as your perspective and viewpoint gets bigger, you have more choices, a larger decision space, a bigger understanding, that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we are. Yes, we can modify future probability. That's how the placebo effect works. That's how healing with your intent works. That's how making it more likely that there's going to be a sunny day for your company picnic rather than a rainy day works. You have a whole lot of people trying to put their thoughts, their intent to it being sunny. That works. But on the other hand, if you have a whole lot of people who are fearful that it's going to rain and mess everything up, well, that will help it raise the probability of it raining. So people who are positive tend to live positive lives. People who are negative tend to manifest negative stuff because we influence what happens with our thoughts.
What do you think about the sort of new agey explanation of how that physically works? Like actually changing your vibration, and if you come into an authenticity of intent for something good or love instead of fear, that your vibration actually changes and it resonates with something, and it actually kind of goes out into the universe and resonates with something, and affects the change like almost physically.
Yeah, well, all the mechanics of that, like vibration and going out to the universe and all of that, is nonsense. But the effect of it, that it actually works, is not nonsense.
Yeah.
Yes. If you can use your intent, and you will raise the probability that those things will happen. And it's the same if you're negative, if you are fearful, that raises the probability that those fearful things will happen. It works either way. And though the New Agers don't really understand the mechanism, they do understand the fact that that works.
Yeah.
And it works better if you are working out of your being level, not out of your intellect. In other words, the being level is what you just called authentic. You work out of an authentic self at your core of your being. Now you're a lot more powerful than if you're working out of your intellect. You work out of your intellect, you're just making wishes. Throw a penny in the wishing well and wish for wealth or something hardly ever works. But that's because it all comes out of your intellect, which is not a powerful way to modify future probability. The other thing is you have to have a very clear, focused mind. And for that, we usually recommend meditation. Get rid of the noise. If you get the noise out of your mind, you will be able to put more intent into it, a clearer intent, a more focused intent. So those are the things that make you more or less powerful as a modifier of future probability.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Is there any way of hack or improving those odds? Like, can you can you increase your influence with emotion or by getting it into your subconscious somehow, or like is there belief help, or like is there any way of upping those odds?
The only way to up those odds that you are going to be effective is to get rid of your fear, get rid of your beliefs, get rid of your ego, because that's all the stuff that creates entropy in your system. That's the noise. That creates all the noisy stuff. Be able to set all of your immediate concerns aside and not continue to process them. And if you do that, then yes, you can make yourself many, many times more effective than if you don't do those things. But the idea that a belief can help comes from the idea that a belief or a tool can help you focus your intent. All right. Let's say, for instance, light workers. We probably all heard that out of the New Age community. These are people that have that heal people, and they do it by taking beams of white light and burning away the negative, bad health stuff. Okay. You guys seem busy there for
no, it's okay. Just we're just trying to fix something here.
Okay.
So that's part of that whole increasing intent and belief is
right. Yeah. So you believe, yeah. So that's just a tool. There is no light. Okay. There is no light. There are no light beams. There is no black stuff. That's the ill health. All of those are metaphors. And if you set those metaphors up, then you create tools that will help you focus your intent. So yes, in that sense, you might say you're making beliefs, but you're not really. If you think it's a belief, it probably makes it weaker. The idea is that it's just a tool that helps focus your intent. That black spots being the bad health, the light beams being the thing that gets rid of them, and so on, are just metaphors. So metaphors are very powerful because it helps change and modify our intent. So that's how you beat the system or hack the system, if you will. You just make yourself a more powerful player. You have to level up, as it were, in video game parlance.
Yeah. So staying along that same vein, kind of, I know after listening to you and following your forums a little bit, and a lot of your work also crosses over to like changing yourself, in order to change the world, right? Is not changing the structure, and that. I kind of don't really. I have a question about. It's difficult because we have a bit of a voice now, and we have a platform, and I struggle sometimes with like how much do we use that to like, because we've been working in a lot of like self-help areas as well, and Darren and I go through different stages of that. One of us seems to be working on ourselves, and the other one's destroying himself. But anyways. But we have like part of me wants to sort of fight back, and not in a physical way, but with information. I mean, just seeing the structure of the mainstream media, and that we have a voice to maybe like uncover some lies, like, or do we just sit back? Like, how do I, you know, balance that, like working on myself versus sort of fighting back? And I don't mean fighting back in a physical way, but you know what I mean?
Right. Well, sometimes even in a physical way is appropriate. But anyway, here's the way that breaks out. The way you change things is to change the fundamentals that are causing the things to be that way, right? And the way that the thing that is fundamental that's causing the problem is the low quality of consciousness. It's the idea that we're not very developed, we're not very evolved as consciousness. As consciousness evolves, it moves toward love, it moves toward caring, cooperation, that sort of thing. So we don't have that. We're not very evolved, and that's why we have all the problems. So how do you get rid of them? Well, one is to change yourself, but the other thing is to help other people change themselves. Now, you can't change other people, but you can provide an environment in which it helps them change themselves. And that's then what you guys do when you talk about these subjects. You educate. You show people bigger pictures. You say, well, what you heard isn't necessarily the only way to think about this problem. There's other ways to think about other things that are important. So just getting people to use their mind analytically, just getting people to do critical thinking, to realize that there are other ways of looking at problems, that is part of the solution. That helps them get into a space where
consciousness,
yeah, exactly. That helps them fix themselves. And only when they fix themselves is the whole boat gonna float higher. So yes, the only way to fix these problems is for the people to grow up and change themselves, but that requires an awful lot of education and people seeing bigger pictures. And that's why when you talk about these things, it's not that you can make anybody grow up, but at least you give them some information that raises the probability, maybe even just a little, that they will put the dots together and grow themselves up. So education's important. It's an important part of it. And, you mentioned that you kind of backed away from, well, I don't mean actually physically fight, but sometimes that's necessary. My philosophy, though it's a philosophy of becoming love, is not a pacifist philosophy. It's a philosophy that has to do with taking those actions, having those intents that minimize entropy for self and for the whole. And sometimes that means stopping things that are very bad, because these bad things are what raises entropy, what creates more fear, and so on. So there is a role for action. There is a role sometimes for fighting back. But
fighting back, yeah, in defense.
Right, but that usually is the very last option, and many people fight back not because they're lowering entropy, but because their ego demands it. You see, now you're just throwing gasoline on a fire, and now your fight makes things worse rather than better. So it depends. There's not a way to know for sure exactly what your motivation is for most people, because they're so confused by their fear and ego and beliefs that they don't really have an authentic self yet.
Yeah.
It's a little difficult for them.
Huh.
So you gotta get there first before you make any big decisions.
I think that's a good idea. You need to grow up yourself, because the more you grow up, the more successful you will be at giving other people an environment in which they can grow up. Because if you just aren't very grown up, but you think you are, well, all the ways that the things you're going to do to help other people grow up will probably be counterproductive. Like, you'll say, well, I figured all this out. And now you start lecturing people and tell them how to live and, what's right and what's wrong, and point out all the things they're doing wrong. Well, that's going to make it worse, not better. You can't push people, bully people, give lectures to people to help them grow up. You just have to give them information they can use, and then let them make their own choices. They have free will. It has to be their choice.
Yeah. I really don't know how to ask this question, but I think you'll get the point. But I feel like you've seen materialism decline over the decades. I'm sure that it's getting to the point where another 10 or 20 years and we'll be living in a different paradigm as far as consciousness goes. But I feel like the polarization, especially in the States and in the world now, is somewhat connected with our last sort of grip on materialism as a paradigm. And I'm not too sure how to connect those two, but I feel like if we all understood that we weren't this avatar and that we were up here, that somehow that would change the culture and the polarization that's going on right now. Do you see any relation to the death of materialism and the last sort of gasp of what's happening here at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think materialism in science as well as elsewhere is kind of being pushed into a corner. And when you push something into a corner, it usually gets more dangerous than it was when it had enough room to maneuver and run. So yes, I think we're seeing kind of the last desperate gasps of materialist thinking in our social thinking. I think that these new ideas about this being a virtual reality, about the purpose of our life here is to grow up, evolve the quality of our consciousness, become love, about other, not about self, etc. As these ideas grab hold, and they will grab hold because they're better science and they're better philosophy. They tend to work. You can put it to the test. These things can be experimentally derived. Let's put it this way. You work on getting rid of your fear and being more caring. And eventually, if you actually achieve that, rather than just act it, but you actually achieve it, you will see that your life will get better, that you will be a lot happier. Your relationships will improve. All this stuff will start to fall out. So it's a thing that thousands of people have done, and they see the results. So it's not a matter of you have to believe it. You just have to try it and prove it or disprove it to yourself is the thing. So as people do this and do apply it to their lives and they do see the results, I think that will put more and more pressure on the holdouts, those that are don't want to grow the quality of their consciousness and are happy with things just the way they are. And it will change everything as we get more and more people with a better attitude, being less self-centered, less ego, less beliefs, then less fear. Fear is the main problem. If we can ratchet down the fear, then our institutions, our governments, our laws, all the stuff that really feels like it's a heavy weight, a burden for us in many ways, our economic system, all of that stuff will start to fix itself. People inside of it will just start fixing it because we as a people will be able to support something better than that. As we change, those systems will change. Those bad systems, our economic system and our governments and so on, these systems are the symptoms of a low quality of consciousness. Low quality of consciousness is not the symptom of these things. These social things are just symptoms. As the quality of the people change, those institutions will change with them. You really don't have to go out and depose that nasty dictator in order to, make the big change. You'll do better by growing yourself, you becoming love, helping other people do that because you understand that will help much more than just getting rid of that dictator, because you get rid of him, he'll be replaced before long with somebody of the same ilk, because that's the ilk that represents us. So it's a never-ending thing. I mean, there's been dictators and greed and nastiness and people trying to rip off other people from as far back as there is recorded history. It's not like you'd say, well, I think we'd learn something by now. We have, 3,000 years of records that doesn't work very well. But that will just keep on keeping on until we change ourselves. So it's not the institutions that make us crazy. It's our craziness that makes the institutions. But yes, the two have to work together. So just because those institutions are just symptomatic doesn't mean that you ignore them. Whenever you get rid of an unpleasant symptom, everybody feels so much better for a while. But just don't think that getting rid of that symptom is going to give you a long-term, a long-term respite from that. It won't. That symptom will just come back in another form, in another way. So the only way to actually make progress is to grow ourselves. But meanwhile, yes, go work on those symptoms. Go stand with your sign. That's educational. Helps people see things from a different perspective. So no, I don't think we should all sit down, get in the lotus position and stare at our navels till the world gets better. That isn't going to work. We have to go out and interact with that world, and we have to be the change. And when we are, things will change, but they'll change slowly. And the infrastructure, economy, the governments, they are symptoms. Yes, we'd like to change those symptoms to make them more benign, but don't kid ourselves that we're actually making permanent changes unless we change ourselves.
I think I heard that somewhere before, that be the change.
Yeah, somebody said that, right? Somebody important.
Yeah, I forget. Speaking of that,
I was Gandhi, I believe. Gandhi said, right. Be the change you want to see in the world.
Is there any other clues in religion that you've noticed that are kind of pointing to this same conclusion? Because have you looked into that angle of it at all? Is that like...
Yeah, no, religion was kind of an odd thing for me. I came from science. I'm a physicist, and I started studying this stuff when I was in my middle to late 20s. That's when I started hanging out with Bob Monroe and learning to go out of body and figuring all this stuff out. And at that time, when you're a young physicist, you pretty much think religion is a bad idea. Religion is something that we'd all do a lot better if you got rid of it. It creates a lot of trouble and a lot of warring and a lot of bad attitudes and so on. But fast forward 5 or 10 years later, and I'm seeing that many of the things that I'm learning, many of the truths that I'm uncovering with my own experience kind of fit right into what many of those religions have been saying, for the last 2,000 years. God is love. Well, God's the metaphor that they use. And I saw the patterns that most religions have a core ethical understanding of being nice, turning the other cheek, being positive, caring about treating others the way you'd like to be treated, and so on. So a lot of these same places I was going, religion had already been there ahead of me and already figured that out. Of course, they also have added a whole lot of dogma and ritual and other nonsense to it. And they've also gotten their egos so wound up about their dogma that they want to kill each other for being different. So it's got its negative side as well. But I redid my assessment of religion from my physicist view and realized that the core values there are actually real stuff. That is the way the world works. That is the way we go forward, is caring about each other, not being so self-centered. And most of the fundamental, the major religions have that at their core. So yes, a religious path is a viable, real path to growing up. You just have to not get caught in the dogma and the ritual and the other nonsense that's there. But if you can make it a spiritual path and a religious path, they're not incompatible. That's just one way of many.
It kind of leads to the question I was going to ask, was about another one that's hard for me to ask, but it's kind of about the hierarchy of beings or entities. Like how does that fit in with the simulation theory and the whole consciousness thing? If I mean, a lot of those entities that people see in another realm, like whether it's the astral realm or whatever, is they have religious connotations. It could be Jesus or the Christ consciousness or something like that, or even at lower level like demons or devils or whatever. How does that fit into the whole thing? Isn't that kind of a sort of a stick in the spokes in a way?
No. What people see are metaphors. Okay, in the out of body, much of what you'll see is metaphorical. It's not like going to Chicago. When you go to Chicago, you see Chicago just the way Chicago's built. And everybody that goes to Chicago sees the same, black spot on the sidewalk, exactly, at that intersection. It's just the way it is. When you go out of body, it's not like going to Chicago at all. You interact with a data stream. This data stream is probably given to you by the same computer that does, our virtual reality. We just call that computer the larger consciousness system, right? So you get this data stream, and the data stream tends to be things that will help you grow up, things that will help you see bigger pictures. Okay, so it's another learning adventure, if you will. And what you interpret that to be has a lot to do with what you bring to the table. If you're a very fearful person, and if you have fear in the back of your mind about what if I don't get back? What if I die while I'm out there? What if monsters get me? What if evil entities come and scoop me up? What if I get possessed? And if you have all of these negative things, then you will find scary stuff there. You will find monsters. You will find things that are unsavory. You'll find black figures with glowing red eyes and, fangs and whatever. You'll find all that stuff because that is you creating metaphors for your own fear.
Wow.
Now here, I said that we have our intents modify future probability. There, your intents outright manifest what that intention is right in front of your face. It's a much, much faster process there because it's a much looser rule set. There's not so many rules that have to be met. And so if you go there fearful, you'll find fearful things.
Can you get things accomplished there at all? Like, can you go there and do something and have an effect here where you've got a bigger effect?
Yes, you can.
Like, can I go in there and learn Taekwondo and then come back here and be better at it?
Well, you probably could do that if you practiced it there. You can do that just in your mind. Just talk about your imagination. That if let's say you have to give a speech, and you're going to give a speech to 1,000 people, and you don't give speeches very often to many people, and you're scared to death about standing up in front of 1,000 people and having to talk and not making yourself look like an idiot. So you go into your imagination and you give that speech, and you give it again and again, and you speak out loud to people, to your imaginary audience. And after you've done that a few dozen times, your fear will reside, and you'll become a really good, you'll do really well with that speech. So yes, working in a non-physical, in this case, an imaginary reality, produces results. You can learn in any reality. All of these experiential realities we get into, out of body, lucid dreaming, regular dreaming, all of those realities are places where we can make choices and learn from those choices. So if you want to go to a place where if you have to come with some knowledge. You're not going to go there and swallow a pill and become a master martial artist. But if you go there with ideas and concepts and ways of moving and things to execute and practice them there, indeed, yes, you will get better at it. Matter of fact, most athletes, really good athletes, Olympic, the people that make, the top middle of the Olympics, those people will tell you that their edge, what makes them tend to be winners, is mental. That the game they're playing, it's mostly mental. It's not physical. You can only do so much with the physical. You can train to where the physical can move on its own without you having to think. In other words, you can work out of the being level from the physical, get your mind out of it. Because if you have to think about it, you'll never be very good at it, no matter what you're trying to do. Whether you're typing or whether you're throwing a javelin, your mind just gets in the way. So you have to get it down at the being level. But it's the mental game. It's the confidence. It's the feeling right. It's the feeling solid. It's the feeling positive. This one's going to go further than any javelin's ever gone. That's the thing that really makes you the winner. Not just the fact that your body is in top condition. All those bodies go to the Olympics are in top condition or they wouldn't be there. The mental game is the difference. So yes, you can go and no, it's not like what was his name? Neo. You're not going to go put in a cassette tape and play it into your head and then become a great martial artist because you downloaded all the information. It's not really about just information. It's not about facts. It's about integrating all of that into your being level. And we do that with repetition and with practice, which is why doing that speech 100 times in your imagination makes you better at it. And going through all of those martial arts moves, when there's no opponent, just doing it in your mind or doing it by yourself, all of that helps. It's all part of a process of repetition that helps get it down to your being level. And yes, you can learn there. The whole reason I wrote the book about consciousness was because I did research there. I figured these things out, not because I sat down and thought about it. I figured these out because I could go to that non-physical place exactly the same way, change a variable, do exactly the same thing, and see what difference that change variable made.
Wow.
And you have to do that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and eventually you can figure out what affects what and what the limitations are and why. So that's why after doing that for some 35 years, I decided I knew enough about it to write the book.
Yeah.
And that's why it was a book about consciousness, really. It wasn't a book about physics. It was a book about consciousness. Knowing consciousness was the fundamental thing, but it was just from a lot of research. And no, I don't think I would ever have figured it out if I had to figure it out from the outside. The only thing that, the reason why I tend to be unique among writers and my books are unique among books and my philosophy is kind of unique among, philosophers is that, I was able to do this inside work from the non-physical in order to help understand this. And that's just because Bob Monroe taught me to be able to precisely reproduce these states so that you could actually test them and see what you could do there. So that's kind of my unique thing in all of this. Of course, if you look at it, you can say, well, most of these ideas have been around for a couple of thousand years. The Buddha 2,400 years ago said this reality is an illusion. I say it's a virtual reality. It's almost the same thing. Yeah. You see, so the ideas have been around forever, but they've never been in the form of logic. They've never been in a basically a science form. That's the difference. With my books, you can start at the beginning and just logically move your way through it. It's not poetry. It's logic. Each step, creates the logic that takes you to the next step. So that's the difference. And, when the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, they were so excited about finding a whole new idea about reality. But when none of them could come up with any theory to explain it, it all just kind of went away. After all, Einstein spent the last 20 some years of his career trying to come up with that theory. He called it a toe. He was just trying to get quantum mechanics and relativity to agree with each other. 20 some years later, he comes up empty-handed. Well, if you're Einstein, you can do that, and you can still bow and everybody will applause. But if you're just some ordinary physicist works at a university and 20 years later you haven't published a paper, you just hit the dead end. You're not valuable anymore.
I feel like there was more intention. It was more intentional to propagate materialism at that time, by the scientists and the powers that be. But I mean, I don't know if we should go there. But I did want to ask, while you're talking about your experiences with Bob, can you tell us about that experience that you had with your buddy, where you both, Bob asked you guys to both do something, and I don't want to say it, but that was pretty profound.
Yeah, that was profound for me. And my friend Dennis that you're talking about, it was not the profound moment for him. It was just another weird day at the office. Every time we went out to Bob's, strange things would happen. Things that shouldn't be able to happen happened all the time. So our life was, out there was so strange every day that when really bizarre things happened, you really didn't think that much about it. You didn't get that excited about it. But this one, got me excited. And this is one where Bob asked Dennis and I to go out of body together. And we usually did. We usually worked together. And I was in booth 1. He was in booth 3. And these booths are soundproofed. And one of them was, I think it was a booth I was in, was also electromagnetically shielded. So there was an empty one between us. If one of us had screamed, the other one maybe would have heard a little murmur. That's about the level of the soundproofing. But we weren't screaming. We had a microphone right about an inch from our lips, and we were talking very softly with Bob as we were doing this thing. So we met above the lab. We both had been going out of body now pretty easily and regularly. That was an easy thing to do. So we met in the out of body state above the lab. His instruction to us were to stay together. Just make sure we always stayed together, and then report what happened. So that was the way we did everything. We had the mic in front of us, and we keep reporting into Bob, because that's the way he taught us, because he couldn't help us if he didn't know what it was we were experiencing. After it's all over, the teaching moment's gone. So we gave a running stream of what was happening to us while we were out of body. So Dennis and I went on a trip. It took a long time. It was about 2 hours worth, which was our typical session with Bob. And after 2 hours, we had been places, done things, saw things, had conversations with each other, had conversations with other entities. It was fairly eventful. And we staggered out of our booths and met Bob up in the control room, and he gave us that little kind of sly look that he had, where you kind of get this smile and you think, what's coming next? And he said, so you two think you were together? And we looked at each other, and we both said, yeah, well, it seemed that way. Yeah, it seemed that way to us. So then Bob says, well, now listen to this. And he took his 2 hands and he flipped both switches on each of the tapes, because in those days, everything was cassette tape, and Dennis had a tape and I had a tape, and he had started them at the same time. And there were Dennis on 2 independent tapes, answering each other's questions, pointing things out. Oh, do you see that such and such? Oh, yeah, I see it. You mean the one with the, yeah, that's the one. And, we're having this conversation that was clearly the both of us were interacting with each other, and we're seeing the same things. So it wasn't just a mind trip, that each of us were having, our own private hallucination. If it was a hallucination, it was a shared hallucination.
Yeah.
Which just runs the probability of it being a hallucination, into infinitesimal, that we would have a shared hallucination to that level of detail. So for me, that was the moment that I got it at the gut level, as opposed to the intellectual level. Up until that point, both Dennis and I were saying, yeah, a lot of weird stuff, but are we sure that's really what we're doing? Could this possibly be true? Because both of us are techies. Both of us are very hard to convince. Both of us came out of a materialist mind frame, and we weren't going to be led anywhere, down la lane. We were going to be very careful. So even though the statistics said it's like, 10,000 to 1 that you guys got this information you got just by good guessing. We had all the statistics, but that affects your intellect. Intellectually, we'd say, oh, yeah, it's real. But at the gut level, nah, we didn't admit that. I didn't admit that until that very day. And when that happened, then I was done asking, is it real?
Yeah.
It was real, and I didn't have to question it anymore, because there was no other way to explain that other than that we were communicating, and we were seeing strange things that, were very unworldly, which means it's not stuff that we would both likely make up. If both of you say, well, I'm in a cloud and I see a black box, well, that's not very evidential. But if you see very, peculiar things that are not really here, so they're not in your, it's not in your
reference.
Memory.
Yeah, it's not in your experience. Yeah,
it's not in your experience. It's not in your memory. And then the two of us are seeing those same things at the same time with the same description and interacting with each other over it. Then to me, that said that it was real. What we were seeing was something that was real. Well, we were both attached to the same data stream, and we were attached to the same data stream from being at the same position. We were together. So that's what you get. And that was a real big one for me. Dennis got to his real big moment, I don't know, about a year later. I don't remember exactly what tipped him over, but like I say, to Dennis, that was just another weird day at the lab. To me, that was the final straw, that finally broke the camel's back.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I wanted to get back to the part about the fear and the love and the entities. Like, it's easy to just to say that, like, oh, if you it's all about your what you bring into that encounter or bring into that, the fear and love. But how do you recommend somebody gets out of that? I mean, can imagine people that wake up in sleep paralysis and there's an entity over them, or people that experience that, and it's probably an instant. I mean, it doesn't happen to me, but people that listen to the show, people that we know, and it's probably an instant fear reaction. I mean, how do you prep? And how do you prep for that next encounter with, let's say, just a demon or a devil or whatever, somebody that's going to attack you while you're frozen in bed? Like, how do you prep for that to try
You prep for that with courage. You have to say, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to experience it. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And I'll accept that. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm not going to run away. I'm going to connect. I'm going to engage with whatever I find and deal with it. And if you make that commitment, now, when I was first going out to Bob's, I guess I'd started going out to Bob's. I had something come to me and basically asked me that question. It said, what if you don't return? Are you ready for that? I had a baby that was like 3 or 4 or 5 years old. I had a wife. I was in school. I had things. At that time I wasn't in school. I was at work. I had responsibilities. So this idea of just not coming back was a pretty big idea. But I thought about it for a couple of weeks, came to the conclusion that this was my path. I thought everything would be fine, but if that's what happened and I just didn't come back, well, everybody would have to adjust. And I'm going to do this thing anyway because it's something I felt I needed to do. Now, that's just me. So the next time something big and scary showed up, I gave it a hug, a kiss on the cheek, and told it to have a nice day. And it just goes poof and disappears. You see? So I got a lot of fear tests around that then for the next month or 2 months. I got a lot of fear tests. A lot of scary stuff would show up just to see if it could chase me home. And I just didn't let it. And then eventually all that just goes away. So the problem is that if you are fearful, you will find very scary things there. And if you find very scary things there, you will be worse off than if you had never tried to go out of body in the first place, because now you'll be more frightened than you were before you started. Fear is the enemy. Fear is the thing we have to overcome. Fear is the problem. So something that leaves you with more fear is not a good thing to do. So the system has what I call fear tests. And that is, if you're getting into that realm and you still have too much fear, you're likely to have a fear test, which is some boogeyman or some black thing at the end of your bed with red glowing eyes or something like that just twangs your fear. You flunk the fear test when it throws you into a panic and you run, then that keeps you out. It's a good way to keep people out that aren't really ready to be there.
Well, what if it's people that aren't intending to be there? They don't want to go out of body. It's happening. I mean, does the same thing apply if it's just happening to you, coming out into a hypnagogic state or whatever, or you're stuck in sleep paralysis? Like, same kind of principles apply then?
Yeah, same kind of things apply. If it's just happening to you anyway, then you probably either are ready or you're within reach of getting to be ready.
Yeah.
So it's something for you to work with.
Yeah.
So if you had a sleep paralysis, don't panic. Just realize that, well, my senses, my body, it senses this avatar, right, runs on a rule set. It doesn't have any input. So when it doesn't have any input, what does it do? Well, it doesn't do anything. And what does it mean when you're paralyzed? It means your sensory stuff isn't doing anything. Well, good. That's what you want. That's your first step, in getting rid of this data stream, of getting out of this physical, is to let the physical go. So being paralyzed means you're not operative here. See that as a good thing. See that as something positive, not a scary thing. if you have a lot of vibration and noise and electrical shocks, just let them be. Write them out. Say, all right, I'm on the bucking bronco. I'm not going to let go, and I'm not going to fall off. And you just write it out, and eventually the system will say, well, okay, you pass, and it'll let you go. That's the way you treat that. You just, don't show the fear. Fear just attracts those things, and I shouldn't really say it that way, attracts those things that would, kick you. It's like a big kick me sign, that somebody sticks on your back. Fear's something that just attracts fear. Fearful things will happen.
Yeah.
Now I've been, approached many times, dozens and dozens of times, probably 100 times, by people who feel that they have been attacked by or have some kind of physical entity attached to them, some kind of parasite, non-physical, sucking out their energy. They've got all kinds of symptoms. The symptoms go from their hair stands on end. They can feel their skin crawling, like bugs are crawling underneath their skin. They hear voices. They can't sleep at night. They have panic attacks. They can't concentrate because these things keep butting into their life. Eventually, these people get to the point of being non-functional. They can't work. They can't sleep. They can't really do anything. If you can't work, you can't pay the bills. If you can't sleep, you really can't work or anything else. So they're searching and searching for somebody that can help them. And they've been to all sorts of people, and nothing really works. And in the beginning, I saw what they saw. I'd look and I'd say, yeah, I see a couple of entities hanging around you, and they're not very friendly. And I would see those entities. It took me a long time working with them, because getting rid of an entity is really not that hard to do. And manipulating things in a non-physical is really pretty easy. And I'd find that I could get rid of these things, but they would always come back. I couldn't make them stay away. And I would do things that should, by the way the rules work, make them stay away, but it wouldn't work. They'd come back. And it occurred to me, after going through many of these, that those entities were creations of those individuals. You talk about thought forms.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these were more than thought forms. These were thought forms that had been pumped up by fear to a very strong degree, and these entities actually become little, thought forms. Not entirely independent entities. They're not going to wander off someplace. They're attached to that individual. Yeah, something like that. There's just something that's stuck to you, that and it does things, it speaks to you. It whispers things in your ear while you're trying to focus on something else. It's constantly there and annoying you and ruining your life. And there's nothing you can do to get rid of it. Well, after a while, I started seeing the connection between them and the people that were creating. I started to just hang out and watch the process of them being recreated.
Wow.
And I wasn't so quick to boot them out, figure, okay, got rid of them, I'm done, and then they come back and do that like 50 times and it never works. I got a little more patience and said, well, let's just sit here and see how they come back. Let's just follow this process a little bit. And they always were regenerated on the spot by those people. Okay, so yes, you'll hear about non-physical parasites that'll do this and do that. For the most part, these are people's fears. And what happens is that you have a fear that something like that might happen. Well, then you get this little twitch, and after a while you think, well, maybe that twitch is something to do with that, and then that twitch gets worse. So as the fear ratchets up, the results of the fear get stronger and stronger, which makes the fear ratchet up more, which makes it get stronger, and it just goes like that until it's so bad that these people can't function. So it's a downward fear spiral where the results of the fear create more fear. And that is a lot more common than you think. Same with a lot of injuries and a lot of problems, a lot of back pain, a lot of chronic pain and illness, frozen shoulders and that sort of thing. A whole lot of that falls in the same category. It often is a creation of a fear, of a person's intent, and the metaphor puts it in a particular body part. Now, there's some physical things going on there too. Those muscles may cramp. You know how it is when you get these knots in your back from a lot of tension, and the muscles just tend to knot up, and they're sore when the chiropractor or the masseuse pushes on them. They hurt a little bit, and they're just these hard knots. Well, your muscles may do things like that in those areas where the fear is manifesting. So it's not that they don't have any physical components. They may, but the physical components are generated by the mind, by the mental, and by the fear. So there's a lot of that negative stuff we take on in both our minds and in our bodies to a much greater extent than people would imagine.
So when you're working on these people, it's through the astral realm then? It's not like you're not seeing these things when you're standing next to them. You're going out of body to check that out and to watch this recreation of these entities as well?
Yes, that's what I'm doing, but yeah. I can do that. I can do both.
Okay.
I can be talking to them and watching them, create and watching the things go. It's like we talked about earlier. It's not that hard to play Sims and World of Warcraft both. You're just not as good at either.
Yeah.
But you can still keep up with the games that way.
And then
so I can do both, but mostly I don't. Mostly I get these in email and I go just look at the person and from a non-physical viewpoint to see what's going on. And it's not all the time. I'm saying this is probably the 99.9% of the time. There are things where people actually do get attacked, but almost always I've found they come from other people in this physical reality. But those are things that do come from outside of them. They're not something that they create from inside of them. So there are exceptions to the case. I'm just saying most of the time for most people who are having these problems, they're problems that are self-created. There's probably the 100th of 1% that fall in a different category. And mostly that doesn't happen here. And mostly when it does happen, the people are really aware of the source. So that's just another whole.
That'd be if they were like cursed or something?
Yeah, something like that. Not really. It's more of a, you use your mind to heal, right? You can modify future probability to get rid of somebody's headache or to get rid of, other illnesses or a cancer or something. Well, you can use your mind to increase a headache, to give someone a headache, to give someone cancer. It works either way. Intent moves future probability. So if you're a frightened person, you tend to create frightening things. But if you are a person who wants to hurt other people, mostly that's because you want something from them. Give me your money or I will, make your children ill, or give me your money or I will make you barren, or I will make you, whatever. Then you have the healing effect in the opposite direction. And it doesn't take place in our culture very much. It's extremely rare here because in our culture, we don't know enough about the way reality is to even think that that's a possibility. We laugh at that sort of, voodoo when we read about it in stories. It's all made up and it's all nonsense. So we don't have that here. But people who come from other cultures where that is a well understood part of reality, they don't have that same thing. There are people who will shake them down, so to speak, with threats of bodily harm to them and loved ones if they don't give them money, and they have the ability to do it. So that's a problem. But in our culture, it's an extremely rare problem.
Well, you could argue that the mainstream media is doing that with the fear porn. That it's always, it's just a constant barrage of keeping people in that state of fear. That's happening. I would say that's kind of happening at that level.
Right, and that's a lot of why we have such a low quality of consciousness. Is this constant beating on the fear drums.
Yeah.
But why would people do that? A couple of reasons, but I think one of the main reasons is that if you know a person's fear, you can manipulate them. If you know what frightens someone, You can make them dance to pretty much any tune you want them to dance to just by manipulating that fear. So if you would like to manipulate people, the first thing you want to do is frighten them. Make them afraid. And if you can make them afraid, well, you've got them. And it's not just our politicians that do that. Our advertisers do that. I mean, how many times have you watched a commercial where, the guy is sent out to get the beer, and if he gets the wrong kind of beer, everybody's going to laugh at him and kick sand in his face. But if he gets the right brand of beer, all the girls in bikinis will all run over to him and hug him, right? Well, that's just trying to sow fear of being inadequate, of getting the wrong thing. And the solution? Well, buy that brand of beer, and now you won't be inadequate. You see, so advertisers are just like politicians. They would like to manipulate us to get money transferred from our pocket to theirs or their customers' pockets. And to do that, the main tool is fear. So look at the ads. Almost all the ads you see first try to create a fear of something going wrong or not happening right or a problem, and then they try to sell you the product. So that's the way politicians work too. If they can get a fearful country, they can manipulate that electorate easily. It's called propaganda. That's the way it works. It's called advertising. It's in many ways it's called religion. It's everywhere you have groups of people with large memberships, and those at top would like to manipulate and move those numbers of members in the way they want. Well, the tool is fear. That's why we have hellfire and brimstone. That's a little fear prod there so that people will do what you want them to do, act the way you want them to act, and raise your salary.
So when you realized that those people were going back into that state, were you then able to just to coach them out of that and explain that to them, and then did you see any results where they would actually wouldn't come back then?
The ones that were open to that, yes, they became very successful and they could get rid of it over time. If they were open to that as a concept. Most people aren't open to that. Fear isn't something people want to face. Fear is something people want to run away from. They want to hide from. And it's very comforting to be able to blame something else, for your problems. It's not me. I've been attacked by some non-physical slug, that is draining my energy. Well, that takes all the blame away from you. You don't have to change. Nothing you're doing wrong. You see, that's a more comfortable place to be. All you have to do is complain about it and suffer. Mm-hmm. Well, if you happen to also be a bit of a person who likes to suffer publicly, or who needs excuses for why you can't continue on with college or whatever else because it's hard and you have this fear of failure, well, then it all kind of works out. So people like that, no, I don't have much success with them unless I can get buy-in at the beginning. Okay, I don't believe it, but let's just say that's the way it is. What do you want me to do? And if they work with me, then basically we almost always work out of that, and they can get rid of these things on that basis. But it's if they can't go there, then they just are stuck.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it just comes down to like a belief thing at the end, almost the same as a placebo.
Yes, comes down to a belief. If you believe that you're being overwhelmed by something outside your control, then that will probably happen. That's probably what you'll end up with.
So that could be a good
life. That's the way your life will be. But if you believe that you can control this thing, that you have the ability to make it go away, and here's the way to do that, then you will find that it gets weaker and weaker and weaker. But there's a thing there. You can't just act it. You see, again, there's no power in acting. If you are really frightened, but you act like you have courage, if you put on your best courage face and beat your chest and growl and say, I'm going to get it and all this sort of thing, but really at the core of you, you're still frightened, then it's not going to work. So it has to be real. The intellect doesn't carry much power.
Can you fake it till you make it for a little while? I mean, that could be a path towards that.
Or practicing your imagination. I was thinking, like, you go there, and you're just imagine that you're telling it over and over again. You're just in your imagination. Fuck you.
Well, I wouldn't. That's not really loving. I think he was talking about hugging it. No, you don't want to.
Right.
Well, different strategies work for different people. Sometimes the idea is to be belligerent back.
Yeah.
It depends on the personality you're working with.
Right.
Sometimes that's the wrong thing to do, because if they get into a fight, it ends up making it worse rather than better. So it just depends on the personality that you're dealing with.
Try love
sometimes
first.
Pushback is good. Yeah.
It always seems so many episodes seem to come back to love.
I know, it's crazy. So we don't want to keep you too much longer, Tom. Do you have any other questions, Darren, at all? I mean, I'd like to give Tom an opportunity to talk about to sort of swing back to his experiments that are coming up and when those are going to come to fruition. And then, I mean, we could go deep into a whole bunch of things, but do you have any other questions?
What's like, if you only had like a couple of minutes to get someone who's not listening to this podcast, say, but if you only had a couple of minutes to get someone kind of down the rabbit hole, what would be like, what's the hook to get people who aren't into this content to start seriously considering it?
Well, if they're like your listeners, they've already maybe listened this far, then it would be different than it was just somebody that never had any thought about it at all. There was somebody, let's say, just on the street. The guy comes and sits down next to me at the bus station, and we get a conversation. Then what I would ask him is, how's life? Are you happy? Things going well? Your relationship's good? You like your job? You got a good boss? What's going on? And of course, most of us, if it had to answer that question, we'd start complaining about all the things that aren't right. No, the boss, is a pain in the ass, and relationships are not working out, and I fight with my wife, and you just get this long litany of things that aren't working out right. Is the way the average person responds to that. And then I might ask them, that there's a way to turn that around. There's a way to end up with a life where the relationships are great, and so on, and that you can do it yourself. Doesn't require anybody else. You don't have to pay for a psychiatrist. You don't have to go to a doctor. You don't have to do anything except a few simple things. And then I would tell them that fear is the problem. And how do you know you have fear? Because you have negativity. Wherever you feel a negative thought, anxiety, anger, annoyance, aggravated, that kind of thing, that's your ego. And that ego only exists because of your fear. And that fear, if you can find that fear, you'll realize that it's been manipulating your life for most of your life. And most people can go through it in about 10 minutes. You usually can find a couple of fears that people will have, and then they will look back and they will see it. Oh yeah, I can see how that fear has made me make all these choices that didn't work out very well. And at that point, they have you've generated a little bit of enthusiasm for getting rid of the fear. So if I were just going to chat with somebody for 10 or 15 minutes, I might do that line. After we've had this discussion we've had, and you got listeners, I'd probably tell them, I said, look, the stuff I've been saying here probably sounds like I just made it up. It probably sounds like it's really off the wall, and it's a kind of a crazy ideas. But that's because in the amount of time we have, I couldn't derive things from scratch. It is all logical. And if you want to find the logic in it, then get the books. And the books are free on Google Books. Or you can buy them like you can buy any other book, Amazon bookstores, whatever. But go through the books and you will see that it is a logical process. And there are derivations for all of this. And then if I just had to sum up maybe, 10 words or less, what's it all about? I'd say love. It's all about love. It's about what you can give, not what you can get. It's about others, caring about others, not so much about yourself. It's about cooperation. It's about compassion. That's what I mean by raising the quality of your consciousness. And there's a logical reason why, it is that way. So if you want to change your life from a struggle and misery and pain to one of happiness and joy and great relationships, then that's what you have to do. You have to become more caring, more positive, more about others. But you can't do it with your intellect. It's got to be real. You can't act it. I don't mean you'll be better off if you act kind. Well, that may be, but what I'm talking about is being kind, not acting kind. There's a difference. So acting isn't it. You got to be it. And that's kind of my 2 or 3 minute talk to the people here, I guess. So it kind of depends on who I'm talking to and how much background they have and how much time I've got. But boil it down to one word, it's about love. Yeah. It's about caring. That's where the good stuff comes from. Yeah. That's what's important. Everything else just isn't all that important. And if it doesn't have anything to do with you growing up and becoming love, then it isn't important. Let it go. See?
And this is really just scratching the surface of all your research as well. Do you want to point people to some of the deeper YouTube videos and stuff that you have as well? Or, I mean, I know there's hundreds of them on there, but you do have, and you have quite an online, website there with you have quite the community there with a ton of people posting in the forums, lots of good conversations and essays in there. I mean, you've built up quite this thing over the decades. Yeah.
Now, most of the science is in the YouTube videos because, like I say, the books were already published when I decided that I understood quantum mechanics and relativity from a whole new level. I put some of that back in the books, but just a little. I don't want to scare people away. These books are already full of logic and very fat, and I don't want to make them any scarier by making them full of physics too. So the books are meant for just lay people. Don't feel like you can't read the book. Second place to get information is from YouTube. I've got over 500 videos, and probably most of those are like an hour and 2 hours long. So it's a lot of videos there. It's pretty intimidating. But look for, there's a workshop that I did in Calgary in 2011. That's a really good one.
Did you know that we're in Calgary?
No, I didn't know you were broadcasting from Calgary. Yeah, I've been to Calgary 3 times.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I wish we would have been at that 2011 one. That was probably just before I moved here, yeah.
That's a good one. And there was an update of that one that I did in Marseille, France, that went over similar material, but just a little better metaphors, a little smoother presentation. And but that one's a little longer because that was Friday night, about 4 hours, and then all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and I think maybe even some of Monday. It's a long one, but it's very, it's a good, one over the world for us explaining everything. And then I've got some short ones. The last year, I've tried to put up a lot of 15, 20-minute ones, half-hour ones, even some that are 4 and 5 minutes, just to hit key points. So you can find some of those in the more recent times. If you want to find out about the experiments and listen to that lecture where I gave all these experiments, that was in 2016. It's called MBT-LA. MBT as in my big toe, MBT-LA as in Los Angeles. And then I think after the LA, there was a 2016. But if you go to my YouTube channel and search on MBT-LA 2016, you'll get this talk. Now, it did go for 2 days, but the first day was all about the experiments. The second day was, why should I care? All right, why should I care about a bunch of physics experiments? And then I relate the physics to life and love and caring and the rest of your life. So that's the 2 days. Now, on the ones that are called workshops, like the one in Marseille and the one that we did in
Calgary.
Calgary in Canada, and probably a dozen others. they all have something neat at the end of them that your listeners might like. And that is, I do some lecturing, and we do some exercises on going out of body, on healing, and on remote viewing. So if you go get those, you can do all those exercises, all the healing, everything that we do. You can just do them with me, as we do them with the audience, and just say, I'd like to see the health body of that person as they were, in such and such, whatever the date is on it. And you'll get the answers, and you'll be able to check and see whether you diagnosed them right. You'll be able to get the targets. And at the end, I show pictures of what the RV targets are. So if you just like to practice and like to get some theory of how does that stuff work? How does remote viewing work? What are the to-dos and the not-to-dos? Same with out of body, same with remote viewing and so on. If you'd like to get that little experiential talk, then any of those workshops will work. And that way you can do all of them. And every one, you get a whole new set of, remote viewing targets and healing and diagnosis targets and so on. So if that's the thing that interests you, then I would go there. It's always on the last day. Usually it's a Saturday and a Sunday. And Sunday we do experiential stuff, and then usually have a big Q&A afterwards.
Nice.
But there's no Learn Kung Fu workshop yet.
No. A series where you can actually see where there's some indexing going on, and that is the things called the fireside chats. Fireside chats are put up by a guy in Germany called Oliver. And if you go to www.matrixwissen, that's MATRIXWISSEN. Of course, Germans pronounce W's as V's, so it's pronounced Matrixwissen. It's a W.de. If you go there and get into his part of the stuff that does my work, he's actually, because he hosts those fireside chats, he has taken every fireside chat, and we're on like number 44 of these. Each one lasts 3 hours. So there's 44 times 3 hours worth of material there. And every hour, every one of them is broken down by subject in his website. So if you go to his website, you can go through years worth of fireside chats and just pick out the subject material that you want, and it'll tell you which chat and at what time stamp you can go to just get that part of the discussion.
Nice. And I'll put that link in the show notes as well. So, and when do you plan on finishing those quantum mechanic experiments that you're talking about?
Well, like I say, we're putting out the request for information, and that's going to be followed by a grant application, request for grant applications, and then we'll do negotiations, and then we'll have our physicists on board, in our lab and our university, and we'll start doing the experiments. The experiments shouldn't take a real long time to do, but of course you never know. The physicists that are the best ones may say, I'm really busy now, I can't get to it for 6 months. You really don't know. So I'd say that we could have them done over the next year. I'm hoping to have them done over the next year, but until you get into it and actually deal with real schedules and people and time and equipment, it's really hard to say, but they're in the near future.
Okay.
We're working on them. We finally got the funds to get it done. Money talks everywhere. Yeah. You walk into a university and say, hey, I got these great experiments. Would you like to do them for free? Yeah. And they show you the door, you see. But if you come in and say, I can pay for them, well, it's a different thing altogether. So we're hoping to get some good scientists lined up to do these and get started as soon as we can make it happen, which could be 6 months or more, just depending on, you want the very best people. Those people tend to be the very busiest people. Yeah. And you often have to wait for them. So it just depends.
Well, we'll keep an eye on the progress on that for sure.
Well, thank you guys. It's been fun. I enjoy these sessions when they're just informal and you just chat. That's nice.
Thanks again, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
So long.
Okay, bye-bye.